Welcome back to the Command Your Brand Show. I am your host, Jeremy Ryan Slate, the CEO and co-founder of Command Your Brand. Reminder, you can check us out over at commandyourbrand.com. And the episode we have today, to me, is something as a parent really, really important. We're going to be talking about the world of child trafficking and really what you need to know about it and also what you can do about it. Because I think one of the major problems we're seeing now is there's a lot of people that are aware of it, but not enough people actually doing something about it. So we have Nick McKinley with us today from DeliverFund. Nick, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jeremy. It's a pleasure.
So for people that may not be aware of you, Nick, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, sir?
Yeah, so short story, the short part of a very long story. I was actually orphaned when I was a very young boy. We think around 2 to 2.5 years old. I was put in foster care, kind of was in that system for a little while, ended up being adopted by an incredible family that moved me to Montana. And you don't realize how lucky you are to live in Montana until you live in the rest of the world. And then you just can't wait to get back to Montana. And so,
having only been there a few times, I will definitely agree with you. It's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, it's stunning. It's amazing. I'm in Montana now, and I'm extremely blessed to get to live here. So in wanting to get out of Montana, I joined the United States Air Force right out of high school, went right into the Air Force Pararescue Teams, which is the Air Force's kind of special operations ground component. And I did that for 11 and a half years. It was an incredible opportunity and really, in large part, is responsible for a lot of what I do today. After that, I did a couple years in the private equity world and then got recruited to the Central Intelligence Agency, where I had the privilege of being part of one of only 2 kinetic units in the CIA. So most people think the CIA is a bunch of Jason Bournes. No, Jason Bourne movies are not a follow documentary. That kind of capability doesn't really exist. Most people at the CIA are professional typists. I say that with love, but they either talk to people and then type it up, or they then read those reports and consolidate them all and eventually get information to the policymakers. I was privileged enough to get to be in one of the kinetic units, which is, the operational guys making things happen in really bad places, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, places like that. And so I did that for a number of years and then kept bumping into the child trafficking issue overseas. And I was, I guess, a little naive in that I was a counterterrorism guy, counter-narcotics guy. I just figured there was a version of me somewhere that was fighting the child trafficking issue, right? That was somebody else's mission.
Sure.
And it wasn't until I was in southern Afghanistan in Lashkar, which is Helmand Province. Probably heard of it. Most dangerous place in the world at the time. And we had what I like to refer to as smoking gun intel on a child trafficker. And myself and this Joint Special Operations Command counterpart that I was working with, he was the lead case officer. So he was looking at where do I write this up and who do I send it to? Because intel is not magic. It's kind of like the banking routing system, right? You've got account numbers and routing numbers to make sure that the intel gets to the right person that it's supposed to get to so that they can turn it into, something that can actually be used by policymakers.
Sure.
And so we were trying to figure out, where does this child trafficking intel go? And ultimately found that there was no reporting code for child trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me really curious. And that's not always a good thing when I get really curious, because then I want to know everything about something. And so we spent weeks diving into the system. And when you work at that level at the CIA, there's nothing that's off limits to you. I mean, you can literally reach anywhere in the US government you want. Ultimately, the intelligence community, the CIA specifically, reports to the Office of the President. So there's a lot of power. So it wasn't that there was somebody doing something and we just couldn't find it. It's that it literally didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So I started asking other operators and, hey, have you ever hit a target who was a child trafficker? And I couldn't find a single operator who'd ever been briefed on a target or a case officer who'd ever been briefed on a collection requirement for child trafficking. And just a few days earlier, we had killed somebody with a drone strike, right? And so I just kind of had this epiphany. I was like, wait a minute. We can kill people with flying robots from 6,000 miles away. But we can't do anything about this, about children who are being sold for any number of reasons, primarily for the sexual gratification of sick humans.
Mm-hmm.
This has got to be, someone's got to do something about this. And so I started doing a lot of research into the issue. And then what really blew my mind was when I learned that dollar for dollar, the United States of America is the largest child trafficking market in the world.
Wow.
So I was just thinking it was an over there issue, right? Because special ops into the CIA, I had spent my whole career focused overseas and focused on confronting the enemies of the United States overseas. And here, the enemies that were preying on our children are right here in America. And this isn't like a border issue. This isn't, traffickers coming across the border. According to the DOJ's own statistics, over 75% of the traffickers who are convicted in their cases are U.S. citizens.
Wow.
Almost 90% of the victims are U.S. citizens. And almost, close to 100% of the customers are U.S. citizens. And so after learning all that information, I just decided there's got to be a better way, and decided I was going to take what I'd learned in counterterrorism and start trying to apply that to the counter trafficking fight, predominantly through creating technologies and data sets and then helping law enforcement with analysis. And it was kind of supposed to be a side project.
Sure.
That just got way out of hand. And today I run DeliverFund, which is the largest counter human trafficking data set on the planet.
So let me ask you this, and I've heard a statistic on this, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's that there's more people under slavery in this capacity than there's been at any point in history. Is that true, or how does that fit in?
It depends on how you define slavery. So where that came from is the Walk Free Foundation, which is this great foundation out of Australia. They actually funded the International Labor Organization report on global slavery. And as part of the terms of that funding, they wanted child marriage to be considered child trafficking. Now, I disagree with that, not because I agree with child marriage, but child marriage is cultural in a lot of societies. And so as Westerners, for us to say that that's child trafficking, I think might be a bit of a bridge too far.
Sure.
What I can say is that whether it is more people under slavery today than at any point in history or close to that, it still just goes to illustrate that we have a massive problem, and the major majority of that problem is right here in the United States.
Well, and the reason I bring that up is I feel like oftentimes we have this idea we're much more civilized now, or we're in a much better condition than kind of people in times before us. But I think when we look at it, the problem is huge right now. And in a lot of ways, it's very covert in the way it's done. So I guess when we look at that modern trafficking in America, like what things are we running into that's actually getting children trafficked? Like where does that actually come from?
Well, let's kind of back up a little
Sure.
bit and just define some terms and what we're talking about here, right? So when we talk about trafficking, what we're talking about is somebody is using force, fraud, or coercion, and it pretty much always ends up in force. But by the legal definition, they're using force, fraud, or coercion to get somebody else to perform labor or a service for their economic benefit. So you do the work, I get the economic benefit. That's slavery.
Yes.
And that's a way to think about kind of what we're talking about. So a lot of what people traditionally think of when they think of child trafficking is they think of the white van with free candy painted on the side that's
Correct.
rolling through your neighborhood and is going to snatch your kid out of the front yard. And that's actually extremely rare in this day and age. In fact, most children in America have a higher chance of being struck by lightning than they do of being abducted by a stranger. Now, the key word here is stranger. So how do we have this massive problem and it's not children being abducted from the parking lot at Walmart? Well, it's the internet. And one of the statistics that I like to use, which is a very good statistic, comes from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is a phenomenal organization. A lot of people think that's a federal agency. I did as well. In fact, when I was at the CIA, I actually tried to get an assignment to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and I had to go talk to some lawyers after that who told me that, hey, that's breaking so many laws we can't even begin to tell you, and please don't call them anymore. That I really wanted to do this work, and so. When we look at the data that comes from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they found that between 2010 and 2015, they had an 846% increase in suspected child trafficking cases. So think about that, like 846% increase in what is commodity sales within a 5-year period. I mean, if that was a stock, you'd put all your money into it.
Yeah.
So why did that happen? The reason that happened is because right around 2013, it started with AT&T. They started financing smartphones. And so they took smartphones, which, let's call them what they are, broadband connected microcomputers that fit in your pocket.
Yeah.
And with the adoption of the smartphone, you see a 1-to-1 correlation with the adoption of social media apps. And that makes a lot of sense since you need the smartphone for the most part to conveniently access those apps. Well, what did those apps do? They, for the first time in history, made it so that a 42-year-old man who was 3,000 miles away from a 12-year-old girl who just said that she's mad at her dad because he won't let her wear the miniskirt, that man now has access to that girl. And that man can pretend that he's a 16-year-old boy.
Mm-hmm.
And he can send her and he can communicate with her directly at that point of vulnerability. So essentially what happened was smartphones made it so that trafficking went from something on the street, right? The red light district, where people saw what they think were prostitutes walking the streets. For the most part, those are actually trafficking victims. And, we used the word pimp back then. A pimp is just a human trafficker. For any traffickers that are listening to this who call themselves pimps, I will die on that hill and I'm happy to debate that issue with you. Just tell me a location. But pimps are human traffickers. Full stop, period. And so when we took that model that used to happen on the street, and it used to be that the traffickers could only get access to the prey, so to speak, right? Those predators could only get access to the prey that they could physically get access to. Suddenly, they could get access to every single child with a smartphone.
That's the thing that's most terrifying to me as a parent. My oldest she's almost 8, and there are a number of her friends that have smartphones, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me. You're 9 years old and you have a smartphone, and they're always asking me, "Well, Dad, when am I going to get mine?" I'm like, "Long time from now, right? You're not getting one. What about when I'm 16, Dad? Probably not." Because that is a really terrifying thing is the level of access. But I guess when we look at it, then how does that happen? Then how does that connection happen? Because I'm sure it's not as much as somebody's on a dating site or something like that. How did these traffickers actually find these kids?
So when I was a kid, right, child in the 90s, I'm much older than I would care to admit. And my sisters, I grew up with 3 sisters, and, my dad, they wanted to wear age inappropriate clothing like all, young teenage girls want to. And my dad would say no, and they would go to their room and they would listen to the Cranberries or Sarah McLachlan or something like that. And they would write angsty teenage girl things in their angsty teenage girl journal. And that was about the end of it. Today, that girl goes and gets out the phone that her dad doesn't know that she has, gets on the neighbor's Wi-Fi and makes a TikTok video on a TikTok account that her dad doesn't know that she has about how she's mad at her dad. And at that very point of vulnerability, that predator slides into her DMs and says, "Oh, that's just because you're so pretty and your dad's trying to keep you from growing up," and whispers all the sweet nothings that she wants to hear and manipulates her into thinking that she's in a relationship with this, cute older boy. Mm-hmm. And I want you to think about this academically. And I do tend to speak in terms of academics when it comes to the fight against child trafficking, because tears does nothing for these victims. It's cold calculating strategy that actually moves the needle on this issue.
Sure.
So that trafficker realizes that he can get the phone for near free, get internet access for near free, and how much does he pay for his Facebook account?
Nothing.
And how much does he pay for all 20 of his fake book accounts?
Nothing.
And his fake Instagram accounts. And he can represent himself as anything he needs to be. So he can be a good-looking 16-year-old boy. He can be a, good-looking 20-year-old boy. He can represent himself in any way he wants. And then he can start manipulating that young girl, which anybody who has had teenagers or grew up around teenagers knows they're probably some of the easiest people in the world to manipulate. And so, because they think they know it all, and they think they're much more mature than they are. And so all of the predatory behavior that used to only be able to happen in the physical world, which was relatively easy-ish to protect your kids from, now happens online. And so it's a single point of entry.
Yeah.
And so that trafficker knows that he's got to talk to 100 girls to get 50 to actually connect with him, to get 25 to have a conversation, to get 10 to have a meaningful conversation, to get 5 to say send a photo or do something they regret, to get 3 to agree to meet him, to get 1 to actually show up.
Wow.
So you can have a 1% success rate, and that one victim is worth about $93,000 a year in tax-free money.
Oh my gosh.
So it pencils. So that's their business model, and that's how it happens. So I hear parents often will say things like, "Oh, well, yes, I allow my kid to play Roblox, or I allow my kid to have Instagram or whatever, but I have all the parental filters on."
Mm-hmm.
Do you really think the traffickers haven't figured out how to get around those parental filters? Do you really think that they can't just go onto the web? And when I talk the web, I'm talking like eBay.
Yeah.
And buy teenage girl Instagram accounts,
Mm-hmm.
and buy age verified Roblox accounts so that they can pretend to be a 12-year-old boy when really it's a 46-year-old man.
Yeah.
And so really that's kind of the lesson here, is that the predators go where the prey is.
Mm-hmm.
And where the prey is on the internet. And because of the Fourth Amendment, law enforcement can't just go out and arrest every person who appears to be a creepo.
Mm-hmm.
And then the internet also made it so that these traffickers can advertise their victims on these commercial sex sites, right? They're advertised as escort sites. There's 27 of them. They're predominantly all overseas and out of U.S. jurisdiction, right? So they're not in countries with good treaties with the U.S., extradition treaties. And so they'll advertise on these websites. Well, now that makes it so that a businessman who's traveling can order a girl to his hotel room, just like he can order a pizza, and for about the same price. So what the internet and smartphones specifically did was they lowered the barrier to entry and reduced the friction and risk for trafficking to near zero.
Wow.
So of course you're going to have an explosion in a market when you have an extremely low barrier to entry and you have no friction and no risk.
Well, in the Roblox portion, that's been a really big conversation that's been talked about recently as well, because primarily, and once again, I don't know if this shows my age, to me that's more of a kid's site. It's something more that's set up for kids and young adults to do. But a lot of times we're hearing now traffickers are even on sites like that and using the chat features and things like that to actually get in touch with these kids.
Right. Because they're going to go where the prey is, right? I mean, a wolf, well, I live up here in northwestern Montana, and so the wolves and the bears tend to hang out close to the watering holes.
Yeah.
Right. They hang out close to the lakes. They hang out close to the streams, because that's where the prey is going to show up to eventually, get a drink of water. They don't have to just patrol the mountains waiting for a meal. Well, it's the same thing with the internet. You have the predator now has a central point where they can go to access the prey, and they do it at scale. And just like any other business, right? Any business has, in this day and age, for the most part, has to use the internet to advertise, to communicate, to access customers at scale. Traffickers are no different. And this isn't happening on like the deep and dark web and the places where people think it's happening. A great example, like you're a highly educated professional. Do you know how to get on the dark web?
I have no
You
idea.
ever been on the dark web? Exactly.
I've heard of it before, and I've heard you get a Tor browser, but I don't know where you get that, and I don't know how you actually access it.
A pastor friend of mine, his wife was doing a teaching on Rahab to a women's group, and
what's Rahab?
And Rahab was a character in the Bible who she was largely thought to be a prostitute.
Okay, I apologize for my not in-depth knowledge on it.
No, that's fine. So she was doing a lot of research on Rahab and on prostitution generally, right? And the whole theme of her message was, hey, these people need love, they need Christ, all that kind of stuff, right? And so she calls me and she said, Nick, I'm doing work on a research on prostitution for this teaching I'm doing, but I want to make sure I don't stumble into the dark web. And her name is Lenya. And I said, Lenya, saying you don't want to stumble into the dark web is saying that you're afraid you might accidentally stumble in to a bank vault at night when the door is locked and the alarm is on.
So you have to be looking for it, know where to find it.
Very, very deliberate and specific actions to get into the dark web. So my point on all of this, behind the reason this isn't happening on the dark web and on the deep web, is because there aren't a lot of customers there. And the traffickers have to do business at scale. They need to be booking, for lack of a better term, they need to be booking services to, somewhere between 10 and 30 clients a day. Well, you can't access that number of customers in the deep and dark web because there's just not that many down there. So you have to do it on the front-facing internet. And this is being advertised on websites that you could find using nothing but your phone and Google in the next 5 minutes if you started looking for it. Like Google is going to serve it up to you.
Wow. Well, and I know there's been a conversation around this, around X, the social media platform, over the last 6 months to a year that, a lot of users want them to ban porn on the platform. And, Musk has been pretty strong, and that's just not something he's going to do. And I think the basic is we need to start handling some of these social platforms too, even on the more basic level of, there shouldn't be porn on the platforms.
Completely agree. I mean, I'm the biggest small government guy you're going to find. I mean, after 17 years of working for the government,
Nick. I'm very much a small government guy too.
Yeah,
it's a big problem.
It is. But I think we can all agree, like, even if anybody who says they're a libertarian is a great example, isn't a true libertarian by definition, right? Most of them are consequential libertarians, John Stuart Mill, Ayn Rand types, right? So even at that level, we can all agree police are a good thing. We should probably have some regulation around like anti-money laundering, like being able to get an anonymous bank account is a really bad idea for society. Being able to, having to show an ID to buy alcohol, to buy tobacco, to buy porn magazines at a convenience store or wherever they sell them. I don't even know if that's still a thing. They should have to show an ID. We can all agree that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Why would it be any different on the modern storefront, on the digital storefront? And so there are places for the government to step in specifically for the protection of the people who can't really, protect themselves. I mean, the reason we have drinking ages isn't because, some alcohol lobbyist said, hey, you know what? I want to restrict my customer base.
Right.
No, it's because there was, society finally said, this is a really bad idea for kids to be getting access to alcohol. It's the same thing with porn. It's the same thing with tobacco. So if we do that in the physical world, why wouldn't we implement the same rules that we know work into the digital world? Right. And so if you think about your area of expertise, so the Roman Empire, and think about the sheer amount of nudity that a Roman emperor, especially a late Roman emperor, could see in their lifetime.
Yeah.
Well, I I've heard a statistic, don't know if it's true, but it's a good illustration that a 12-year-old boy today can see more and varied nudity in a single day than a Roman emperor could in their entire lifetime.
Wow. That's insane. That's insane. And
Because
I guess
it's all been digitized.
Well, and the simplicity of it too is, I don't have many vices, but one of them is I do love my nicotine. And I tend to buy a lot of it online, and I have to give my ID to buy it and my ID to pick it up when they deliver it. So at the same time, it can be done. So I guess why aren't we enforcing these things?
Oh boy, why? I don't know. I tend to be one of the least conspiratorial people there is, but I do believe that we are just seeing a absolute demolishing of widely accepted morality within our culture.
Yes.
And I think, we're kind of ending up in a period of time where we're under the tyranny of the minority.
Mm-hmm.
And that's as big, if not a bigger problem than the tyranny of the majority issue that, Jefferson wrote about. And so I think that if you look at the issue, why are we having this? Well, why does Musk not want to restrict pornography on X? I think there's a number of different reasons for it, but the number one reason is that it's going to slow him down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to cut into his ability to win the AI race. That's going to cut into his ability to make X profitable. And so they don't want those guardrails.
Mm-hmm.
And Musk has come out multiple times and X has come out multiple times saying that the people who abuse their tools should be held accountable to the highest standard of the law. And I think we should all agree with that.
Yes.
But if I go give a firearm to a 9-year-old and they hurt themselves or somebody else, I should be liable for that. Well, what they're doing is they're essentially giving something that is much more powerful and much more destructive than a firearm to 8 and 9-year-olds. And so the fact that you don't have to, the fact that you can open essentially an X account or something like that without X having any idea who you are,
mm-hmm.
is I think in itself a little bit of a problem, right? There's a difference between privacy and anonymity,
mm-hmm.
right?
Well, that even affects the nature of conversation, because when people are anonymous, they'll say things they would never say to you if they show their face.
Right. Or they're just not real. Mm-hmm. They're a 16-year-old kid at the Internet Research Center in Moscow with good English skills who's been specifically trained to run 50 different accounts very purposely to cause fights and try to degrade American society.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the way to think about this, I think, is like your license plate on your car. That provides privacy, but not anonymity.
Correct.
And I think we can all agree that license plates on cars, the ability for law enforcement to know or be able to find out who is driving a car or who owns a car is a good idea.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like, how are you going to have a society that has any regulatory framework that actually allows things to work? So again, kind of back to, I generally tend to think that government's getting involved in government regulation is a bad thing, but
mm-hmm.
there are places for it, and I believe that this is one of them.
So I guess, how do we confront that issue then? Because there is the struggle of civil liberties and things like that of wanting small government, and at the same
mm-hmm.
time, if your kid has a secret phone you don't know about and a social media account you don't know about, how do you solve something like that? Like, how do we actually confront this problem so that we, on one side, respect civil liberties, but on the other side, not let this problem continue, because it is a real problem?
The biggest lever, like if you were going to pull one lever, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to make you king for a day and you can do whatever you want to try to solve this problem, the biggest lever that you could pull is to get rid of, what I think are colloquially referred to as burner phones, mm-hmm. which are VoIP phones.
Or like the ones you go to Walmart and buy or something like that.
Yep. Yeah. It's the prepaid cell phones. It's the ones that, phone numbers are provided direct to consumer by companies like, Cinch and bandwidth.com. And, these are probably companies you've never even heard of.
Mm-hmm.
And a great example is there's an app, and I don't want to say the name of the app because I don't want to drive business to it. But there's an app on the App Store where you could download that app and you could have hundreds of phone numbers going to your phone for less than $100 a month.
Oh my gosh. Well,
That
there's
level
SIM card apps you can buy too that you can have
Yep.
SIM
Yeah,
cards for all
absolutely.
different places on the same device.
Yep. With eSIMs. And so that level of counterintelligence capability used to only belong to governments. And now you can do that for less than $100 a month. So why do you think we've seen such an explosion in just crime writ large? Is because the ability to essentially stay off of law enforcement's radar is so good compared to what it used to be. And that's actually the piece that we need to get reeled in, right? So when you went to AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile and you got the phone that you use most of the time, your primary phone, you had to show an ID.
Mm-hmm.
And if I get into our software and and you try to call me, we have law enforcement grade data access at DeliverFund, and so I can actually see that phone number is registered to you.
Well, and most of them do a background check too, because they'll do like a credit report poll or something like that when you get the phone.
Yeah, so they're doing a credit report, but they're also doing a couple other checks to make sure that you're not on the FBI most wanted list, and they're giving you a phone and things like that. So is that a perfect solution? No, but it's a good enough for now solution, and that would actually get us greater than 80% of the way towards solving this problem.
Mm-hmm.
The predators who are selling children on the internet today, they use anonymity to their advantage. And so when I talked earlier about reducing friction and risk, well, the friction is reduced by the internet. The risk is also reduced by the internet. So if any business owners listening to this, they spend, especially CEOs and founders, they spend the major majority of their time in business thinking about how to reduce or insure against friction and risk within their business, right? How do I reduce the customer friction? How do I make it really easy, 1-2 clicks for the customer to give me their money and to get the thing of value that I'm providing? How do I get the right insurance policies in place so that I can reduce the financial risk to my company for anything that I can't actively, say from a technological perspective, reduce? Like that's what they're thinking about.
Yeah.
Well, so are traffickers, because it's a business model to them. And that was one of the very interesting things for the difference between where I came from, which is obviously the fight against terrorism, and then going into the fight against trafficking, because terrorism is largely ideological. And that's not to say that it's not a business and there aren't people making a lot of money around terrorism, because there clearly are.
Sure.
But there's a primarily a ideological driver outside of what we call the 1% true believers. Everybody else is there to make money, or they're there for ideological purposes. Trafficking, there's no ideological purpose to this. It is strictly 100% a money play, and this is their business. And part of the reason why traffickers are in trafficking and not narcotics or guns is because it's lower friction and risk. There's a higher customer base. Statistically, about 9% of American males are customers of this, this commodity. Well, 9% of 350 million is a lot of customers. And so if you look at it through just the sheer economics numbers, you can start to see that, oh, this is actually a business that pencils really well for them. And we talked about how that trafficking victim that they finally get into what they call their stable, they get that victim into the stable. That victim's worth, the best data we have shows about $93,000 a year in what is black market money. So which means they're not paying taxes on that.
Yeah.
So that's the equivalent of making what? 120 plus?
Yeah.
And they're running 3 to 4 girls per trafficker. That's a lot of money. to be made in a single year. So this is an extremely profitable business endeavor. And there's no dog that can sniff out a trafficking victim like they can sniff out drugs, right? There's no serial number that can tell you whether or not this was a stolen thing or not, like there is with, property crimes and firearms. And so it's a business that has the same scale advantage in this day and age of every other business.
So then, phones cut out 80% of it if we were able to handle that. But then how does DeliverFund fit into all this? What are you guys doing to kind of help move the ball forward on this?
So we are a technical platform first and foremost, a technical and a data platform, and then kind of our secret sauce is we hire people out of the intelligence community to then embed in law enforcement task forces and actively help them with help law enforcement, district attorneys, county sheriff, right? It's primarily state and local, help them with human trafficking cases. Those the analysts that we have embedded then learn more and more about pivots in the trafficking market, where they're advertising, communications, things like that, and they get that information to our engineers. Our engineers then automate what it is that they learned, and that cycle just continues. So we only have a few human trafficking analysts, but our data serves through our own platforms or through partnerships over 8,000 law enforcement officers across the United States simultaneously.
Wow.
So it's think of it as a traditional SaaS business, just like, got another business called 10 Point Data, where we're basically, we're a Palantir, but for small to medium sized businesses and nonprofits. So you build custom AIs and custom data sets and things like that. It's no different. It's just that we're very specifically focused on the fight against human trafficking, and we are giving it away to law enforcement thanks to the generosity of our donors. And the reason we're giving it away is back to what we talked about in the beginning. Law enforcement doesn't have any money for this, right? There's no pool of money within the federal government that's going to go fund your state or local law enforcement for the fight against human trafficking. And, especially with the movements we've had over the past, I call it half decade of defund the police and all of this, where people are deciding that, they don't need the police. I think that we're starting to see the shift back. People are realizing maybe police are a good idea.
Yeah.
But when law enforcement doesn't have the money that they need to just be fully staffed, or just make sure every law enforcement officer has a computer, or I was just talking to a law enforcement detective in a small town. They had 18 total law enforcement officers in this town in Montana, and they didn't have enough money to buy every law enforcement officer a rifle.
Oh my gosh.
And this is in Montana, where the law enforcement isn't just dealing with criminals. They're also dealing with bears and mountain lions and things like that getting into the city. And so they actually had law enforcement officers that were a rifle was assigned to a shift. And so a law enforcement officer would actually pass that rifle off to the next guy. And so when they don't have the money to just buy the weapons and the computers they need, we can't expect them to also come up with the money to be able to buy our tools or to be able to fully staff those detective positions. So we come in and we equip them, we train them, and we advise them, equip them with technology and data, train them how to use that technology and data, and then advise them with intelligence on who the traffickers are so that they can go put handcuffs on them and rescue the victims.
Well, and I think for most people, national politics can be absolutely overwhelming because there are a lot of big issues that, you really can't do that much about at a national level. And I think when we look at an issue like this, the interesting part about it is those of us individuals out there, we're actually responsible for keeping our group ethical, right? Because we all do that together on a local level, especially. So I think with something like this, the exciting part is for those of us out there is we can actually do something about this by helping a group like your own or in other ways getting involved. So for people that are listening, if they want to support you, if they want to help in this fight, they can actually do that by helping you. So how can they do that?
Best place to go, kind of the one-stop shop, is DeliverFund.org. deliver.org/podcasts. So that's deliver as in like deliver the mail, deliver me from evil, right? Deliver and then fund.org/podcasts. And you can find myself and DeliverFund on all the social platforms just at DeliverFund. But that individual donor is the one who's the most important. I just put out a reel, I think it was on Instagram, and I'm sure it's on YouTube and stuff like that. But the where I was talking about the Epstein files, and very specifically talking about how people will say, well, why isn't Richard Branson? Why isn't Bill Gates? Why aren't these people just cutting these big checks to solve this issue? Well, because they're in on it. They're the customers. Mm-hmm. They're not interested, right? The elites of our society, and that's not to say that we don't have a billionaire here and there who are extremely philanthropic and help us out a lot, but not to the level of budget that's actually needed to get to the bottom of this issue. So the individual donor who says, you know what, I can give $50 a month, that goes so far, and it decentralizes the money. I actually had a donor once who's a very, very well-heeled individual who I started talking about on podcasts how trafficking was happening through strip clubs and, pornography and things like that. And he actually called me and was like, hey, I think you're getting off topic. Why don't you just stay on topic? I was like, but I am on topic. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't think that individual actually donates anymore.
Wow.
And it was a significant amount of money. So that's why, again, the individual donor who, again, help to keep society moral, help to keep society in check. This is how we all band together and make that happen.
Absolutely. Well, Nick, thank you for the work you do. Thank you for being here. And we'll definitely have to do something again soon. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate you.
And for those of you out there watching, a reminder to like this video, share it with somebody, do your best to support DeliverFund, and we will catch you guys next time.